All right.
All right. I'm Carol Bonesack, the Executive Officer of the Greater Iowa City Home Builders Association. And today we have Jessica Bristow with us, with the Historic Preservation Planner for the City of Iowa City, to talk about the do's and don'ts of buying, owning, remodeling within the historic preservation area in Iowa City. So thank you, Jessica, so much for being with us today.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen. I have some slides, a presentation that we have made. Here, I have to get it to come up. I mentioned already, I have not actually presented here, so I don't know what you can see exactly. So
I can see your slide and the next slide on the side.
Oh, okay. I know what you're looking at. So let me do it a different way. I'm sorry about that. Technically, I'm just trying to figure it out with the two screens. I'm used to the laptop all year.
Yep.
So. I'm trying.
Jessica, you want me to come over there?
Maybe I want to do the share a portion of the screen and it's just not working.
Yeah, here, let me, hang on one sec.
Sorry, everyone.
Nope. You're fine.
By the time we're all experts in Zoom, the pandemic will be totally over.
Well, while we're waiting, I'll give an update on some upcoming events. Oh, here we go. You got it.
Then I had to learn how to unmute myself too, so sorry. Okay. So let's see. Just very briefly, I wanted to let you know that historic preservation is a national movement. It began basically with the Historic Preservation Act in 1966. It arose out of a reaction to some of the building practices with the modern movement, and locally, of course, with projects like Saving Old Brick in the 1960s, our local response to urban renewal in the 1970s, and then finally in the 1980s, Iowa City started to develop some local preservation ordinances. Okay, so it's very important to understand that there's a national historic preservation component and a local historic preservation component. Properties and districts can be listed on the National Register of Historic Places. That's an honorific designation. It does not provide any protections for anything that's listed in the National Register. It does not prevent property owners from making changes or demolishing buildings. What it does do is it provides opportunities for financial incentives. There are state and federal tax credits. Sometimes there are grants. Sometimes the state has other sources of funding for these properties. The only time when there is some restriction is if you do take state and federal funding. There's usually a 5-year moratorium or so on demolishing that building or other major changes. Locally, a district or a landmark designation does provide protection for the property. These properties go through design review. They can't be demolished unless there's specific circumstances. Basically, that whole neighborhood or that property would be protected. As I said, changes to the exteriors are subject to review. Interiors are not reviewed at all, so it's just the exteriors that are. And there are all multiple benefits that we'll talk about later as well. So locally, Our designation of a district or an individual property is a zoning designation. We apply an overlay, a historic overlay over whatever the building or area's current zoning is. We have 8 local historic districts in Iowa City. All of our historic districts are also listed in the National Register of Historic Places. So for the historic district itself, it has that national component. For us in Iowa City, that comprises about 689 properties. We also have created a local designation. The local designation is a conservation district, and basically that means that that neighborhood did not have enough historic properties to rise to the level of a historic district. We still felt as a community that those neighborhoods were worthy of protection, so we created a local conservation district designation. And that does not have a National Register component because that area would not be eligible for the National Register either. Currently, there are about 806 properties that are in conservation districts. We also have individual landmarks. Some of our landmarks are in districts, but most of them are not. They're usually individual properties. For us, many of them are listed in the National Register of Historic Places, but not all of them. We have 65 local landmarks and 45 additional properties that are also only listed in the National Register. So there are some properties that are listed in the National Register that don't have that local district designation. And of course, there are properties such as the courthouse, which is owned by a government above our local government. So we don't regulate that as well. Here's a map that I really like. It shows our historic districts in the light gray color and our conservation districts in the dark gray color. Basically, it's spread out through most of the original town and a little bit, towards Longfellow and the southeast side of this portion of town. And you also see our local landmarks. And so they're basically sprinkled throughout. Many of them, as you can see, are not within districts, but some of them are. This is another map. We send an annual mailing to all of the property owners, and for the people who are in districts, we include this map on the back of their letter. And this shows you kind of the breakdown of the different districts and their boundaries. And we'll talk about a little bit about boundaries in a second as well. It is possible to look up for yourself to find out if a specific property is within a district. Here I have the Johnson County Property Information Viewer. You can see the web address across the top. If you go there, you'll zoom in and find the area you're looking at. And then up here on the right, you can see that there are some tools. If you click on the middle one, the layer list, you can go down to the zoning section and you can click on Iowa City zoning overlay. And that brings up the map level that shows you where the conservation districts are and the historic districts. So we have kind of a little dashed vertical line for conservation districts and a crosshatch for historic districts. And if you look in this area that's shown on the map, this is Mercy Hospital, Bloomington, Gilbert, Market is down to the south here. You can see that this area up in here, we have the vertical lines of the conservation district, and we also have the crosshatch lines of the historic district. So you could look on this map and see which properties are in a district going here. You can also just reach out to us and ask as well. We have our own maps that we have created, partially because for how we regulate properties, we split the properties into specific types within each district. This happens to be the Jefferson Street Historic District. It is the most recently designated district. The map, the district outline is the heavy bold line. So all of the properties which are inside that bold line are part of the district and subject to review. As you can see, there is a key at the bottom, and we basically separate properties into those that kind of contribute and those that don't. So anything that is gray is a contributing property. That means it is an example of the properties that were historically built in this neighborhood. They are, they contribute to the story of that neighborhood, and they're usually built within a specific time frame for that neighborhood. The ones with a star are a little bit more special in the fact that they are considered key properties. That is only a local term that we have. So the way we apply that is frequently those properties could be eligible for individual National Register listing. They could be then local landmarks. They also might be properties that are just really important to our community specifically. This Jefferson Street Historic District, it happens to have many more key properties than most districts. It's because it's a very intact neighborhood. The properties that are just white with nothing else, those properties are non-contributing. You see a couple here. In this district, why a property is non-contributing might change depending on what district they are in. In this district, because it's so intact, it could just be that they have synthetic siding on them. Maybe they have what we would consider an inappropriate addition or something like that, that makes them non-contributing. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. This district also has only one non-historic property. Now there is a historic building and then the Newman Catholic Center, which is new. And so because that is all on one property, that is considered a non-historic building. When we would look at that building though, we would review that building where if they were working on the historic building, we would treat it like a historic building. And if they were working in the modern building, we would treat it like that. You can see that this boundary is fairly regular. The boundaries for districts are usually created to create a cohesive, more regular boundary. We tend to like to divide districts at streets or alleys or something like that. Here, this area is excluded because it's all university property. And to the north, this boundary exists where it does, mostly because suddenly we change from being a residential and maybe a church kind of neighborhood to a more business oriented, we have the North Side Marketplace above that. So that's part of the reason why we have the north and south boundaries. And then again, we change to university to the west, and then the story just changes a little bit when we get to the east, partly because of Mercy Hospital and expansions. This is an example of a conservation district map. It is much larger. The boundary is not orthogonal. It does follow Muscatine Avenue, as you can see, but there's also some ins and outs and some undulation to this boundary. Part of that is because this conservation district surrounds several historic districts. We have Woodlawn, so this area is not included. We have the East College Street Historic District, which is kind of circled here. We have College Green, which extends up into here, probably doesn't include that building. And then, of course, as we move west again, we get into a more commercial kind of neighborhood and city hall and stuff like that. So that's part of the reason why the conservation district has a boundary like it does. When we're looking at this, we can see there are a lot more non-historic properties. Again, they are still regulated properties, but they were either built or changed so that they weren't 50 years old at the time when the district was made. Oh, and I did want to say one of those things, part of the reason that we create a conservation district is there is some hope that a portion of that neighborhood or the entire neighborhood could be elevated to becoming a historic district. If you look at the properties that don't contribute, some of them, it could be a matter of reversing some, again, what we call unsympathetic changes that might make those properties contribute to a district in the future. And if enough of those properties would change so that the, I guess, percentage of the contributing properties increases, that could become a historic district. So part of the non-contributing properties can certainly become contributing over time. In fact, non-historic properties, once they achieve an age of 50 years, especially if they are some kind of recognizable architecture, they could become a non-contributing or contributing property. So why do we review these properties? We do have several goals. First of all, as a community, our first goal is to retain the historic character of the neighborhood. We like that walkable neighborhood. It has a certain character to it. We want to retain that. Frequently, we do that by retaining the historic character of the individual properties or improving it if it's a non-contributing property. So we work from that neighborhood level to the individual property level. And then from there, we work with the individual materials. By retaining the original materials that the properties were built out of, that helps us retain the historic character of that property and then, of course, the neighborhood. And one of the goals of historic preservation, even from its earliest inception, really, was an element of sustainability, for which we do really work hard to reduce landfill waste. So we have several types of review. Early on, all of the projects that came before our Historic Preservation Commission actually were heard by the Historic Preservation Commission. There was no short line to getting approval. Everything went to the commission. So over time, as our process has developed, we have developed some levels of staff review. The first one listed here is minor review. This is actually one of the last ones to be created. But what happened is the commission kept approving things the same over and over and over again. And all of the properties seemed to meet the same kind of conditions. And so as those things started to become kind of regularized by the commission, they felt that staff could go ahead and approve it as long as it met the same conditions. So we have several things where they keep coming up, they tend to be all the same, the situations are the same. And so we've kind of made them pre-approved, meaning that they're pre-approved by the commission for staff to approve them for the homeowner. Certain decks and ramps, some small garages, installing radon systems and where that pipe goes, windows, all of these things, they still have to meet the guidelines, but staff can approve them hopefully faster than the commission. There are some staff and commission chair reviews. One of them is what we call a certificate of no material effect. We issue that when something's going to be repaired. And so we'll use those original materials and those that match. We also use that when things are going to be replaced, but the replacement materials also match as well. And that just says that it's not going to have a material effect on the property or its historic character. We also have an intermediate review, and this is kind of for the discretion of staff and the commission chair, but these are projects that don't need to go to the commission. Usually they're in conservation districts. Maybe they're changes to the back of a building or changes to a non-historic building, something like that. They might be slightly larger, but we feel that they can be reviewed by staff and just the chair of the commission. Everything else goes to the full commission for review. We have monthly meetings. They're the second Thursday of every month. Usually people apply at least 3 weeks before that to get on the meeting. There are several projects that don't require historic review, but there honestly are not very many. If it tends to be on the historic or on the exterior of a historic building that is in a district or a landmark, it likely needs review. So you can always check with us, but we don't require, basically we review anything that requires a regulated permit. So if you're gonna do a new curb cut, that requires a permit, so we would review that. If it's a mechanical permit for a mini split system, we would review that so that we can review where the piping goes and where the equipment goes to make sure it's not impacting the historic character of the building. Anything, of course, that needs a building permit on the exterior, a sign permit, demolition permit, all of that. Some things that do need review are also only reviewed because it is a regulated property in a historic district. For instance, the application of siding, window replacement. We also review the replacement of roofs and front doors on landmarks and properties in historic districts. That's something that changed in 2015. We don't review roofs and front doors in conservation districts. And then, of course, the demolition of all or even a portion of a building. If you're going to remove the brackets from a roof, then yeah, we would review that. These are the ones that don't require review. So we do not review the painting of wood on the exterior of a house. That needs to happen all the time, so you can just do that. We do review masonry though, and we don't want you to paint a foundation that has not been painted historically because that can damage that masonry. People who construct fences that are less than 6 feet in the backyard, 4 feet in the front yard, they don't need a building permit or review. We don't review gutters or new storm windows or outbuildings that are smaller than 144 square feet. But if you're not sure, please reach out. We would much rather tell you that you don't need to review than have to review something after the fact. There are many benefits to local historic district and landmark designation. And I'm going to go through and talk about some of those. I think they can be broken down into 3 different categories. One is basically property protection. If you're living in a district, you are basically protected from your neighbor doing some kind of an insensitive development, putting an awkwardly designed addition on the front of the house. You are encouraged to rehab your property because you know that your investment in that property is protected because you're within a district and the property values are protected. We find that across the nation, across the board, property values appreciate usually at a greater rate in a historic district, locally designated historic district, than they do in a similar neighborhood that is not designated. And that's again partly because there's no development encroachment. Everyone is expected to follow the same guidelines and regulations. And so those properties tend to increase value more quickly. And honestly, because of the fact that we review changes to properties, that encourages a better quality design. We want to work with the historic architecture. We want to have additions and changes work with that building. And that tends to lead to a better quality. Plus, since there's the review by staff or staff in the commission, anytime you can get more eyes on a design, that's more input, a little bit of critique and design improves through that process. Another benefit of a local district is environmental concerns and sustainability. First of all, there's the fact that we are taking established neighborhoods and reusing them. We are using that resource that we have in our community and keeping that. We are reducing the landfill waste that would occur if all of those buildings were to come down and be replaced. We're creating a neighborhood feeling where, you know, it's an established neighborhood, you're maintaining it, you're continuing to use it. It's usually close to, say, downtown, so it's a walkable area that reduces, you know, transportation costs and emissions as well. And one thing that is also important to understand is that older buildings really were designed to also work within the environment. Historically, people didn't want to be uncomfortable either. You know, they wanted to have a cool house in the summer and a warm house in the winter. These houses are established with very large windows. You get a lot of light coming in with double hung sashes. You can open the top and bottom sashes. You have windows on all sides of the house, so there's cross ventilation. Usually there's greater overhangs that can help shade spaces and create cooler spaces outside. And also, typically they use materials that are good for the local environment. You know, we're not going to have adobe structures in Iowa because our climate is not good for that, like the Southwest would be. So usually they are designed to be a little bit more passively efficient. Another benefit of a local historic district is the economic benefits. Many communities see increased tourism. If you have a historic district, you promote it really well. You know, we know that a lot of people tend to do their vacations and travel based on heritage tourism. They come to see sites that are different from their local community. And within the realm of historic preservation, we look at the preservation of our community as the preservation of our unique culture. So we are preserving what makes our community unique from other communities. And, you know, we don't tend to have people who want to go visit a community that looks like every other community. People tend to visit a community that has something unique. And for us, it's our unique history, and we can draw on that. Another way that that comes into play is, you know, anytime a business, especially a big business, is recruiting people, you know, we have a great historic downtown. We have these established historic neighborhoods. These can be a draw for those businesses as well when they're trying to recruit people from outside. And then, of course, there's the societal benefits. You basically have an educational model of the history of your community that still exists. You can interact in it and live in it and work in it. You can go downtown and see it. You can learn from the history of the buildings and how our community developed because it still exists and it's still there. We have people have a connection with their community as well. And because of that walkable aspect, the fact that these neighborhoods tend to be, you know, closer into the downtown and the commercial districts, you know, there's a greater sense of a happiness because of the fact that they can live and work and walk within that same community. So again, this is my favorite map. It is there just to remind you that all of the properties that are here within either the gray backgrounds or with the red dots are subject to review and are regulated properties. So anytime that you would work with one of these properties, purchase one of them, you would potentially have something that needed to be reviewed. So how do you apply? Usually an owner or contractor would contact staff. We might discuss the property, kind of talk about its individual historic character, kind of see, you know, what's the goal and how can we help make that successful. The property, we go and review that property during that process. We'll take photos of it. We'll look at the history of it that we know about. We'll consult old maps. We'll look into past projects that have happened. And that's so that we know what we're working with. We know the history and the historic character of that property. At some point during the process, someone submits an application for historic review. That could be the contractor, it could be the owner, it could be a designer if there is one on board. It doesn't matter to us. We can work with anyone, and all of our applications are now online with the building permit system. Sometimes drawings are necessary, and this can actually be one of the more difficult things for many homeowners, and I understand many of our contractors as well. You know, if you're going to do an addition, we have to have drawings. If you're going to change something, we have to have drawings often. We need to be able to see kind of what it looks like before and after. A lot of what we're looking at and reviewing is aesthetics, and people are very visual. And so we do rely on drawings more than descriptions to review properties and projects pretty often. We used to be able to do those drawings for people as they needed, but we don't have really enough time at the moment. We try to come up with lists of contractors and drafters and people who can do that for people. But we do realize that it's still difficult. So sometimes, you know, if you're creating a deck, sometimes we can just take a sketch. We do review those drawings, and we review the products. You know, if you have new windows and doors in your addition, we want to know what windows and doors are going in there. So we will review those. And frequently, the drawings or products might need to be revised. At that point, once we know what we're doing and it's all good, it works with the guidelines. For staff review projects, we write up an approval, and then the applicant would acquire a building permit. All of our approvals are in writing, and we issue a certificate of appropriateness or a certificate of no material effect. We won't ever give an approval just through an email discussion or verbally or in person or something like that. It's all written. For commission review projects, then, staff writes a report about how they worked with the guidelines and what the recommendation by staff is. And then we present it to the commission, who discusses the project, whether or not they want to alter anything, and then approves it. And then again, we turn around and write a written approval. We really want to help people in these districts. That's what I'm here for. I'm here to help. I'm here to help go through the guidelines. I'm here to help people and contractors and suppliers understand what our goals are and what we're trying to do. But we also have some other specific things. First of all, we do have a historic preservation fund. We have a $40,000 annual budget, and we dole that out in grants or loans that help people with half of the cost of a project. So our maximum grant or loan is $5,000, and that would be for a $10,000 project. So we're looking at about 8 projects a year. Typically, the grants are for owner-occupied properties where the owners are below an income limit. If you want to know, that income limit is 140% of the median income of the area. The loans are for people above that income limit, or for properties that are income properties or rental properties or something like that. The loan is a no interest loan paid back over 5 years. Staff also meets on site. We discuss potential or current projects. We meet with people who just bought the house and want to talk about everything on the house. Anything you want to do. Honestly, it's my favorite thing to do, to meet the people on site and talk about the house. I learn something every single time I look at a historic house. And I also like to help educate people about what they have if I can. We often suggest appropriate solutions. I personally have both an architecture and an architecture history background. So I do help problem solve. You know, if somebody comes with an addition, they have a goal, but their addition doesn't work, I will try to help direct them towards something that could both meet the guidelines and meet their goals as well. We do provide lists of contractors. These contractors are just people that we know who have worked in districts on these properties. We've been able to review the quality of the work and how they tend to work on these projects. Sometimes there are contractors that we found out about because of our annual awards that we do. If you or anyone you know works on historic properties and wants to be on our list of contractors, just please reach out. You know, we just want to make sure that the contractors would tend to do things right. But we also make it very clear to all property owners and designers that they can use any contractor they want. We do not restrict that in any way. We just try to help. We know that a lot of the work that these people have to do on these properties require special skills. And sometimes those methods, means, materials are not as typical in the modern building industry. And so providing a contractor who can work with that is something that we want to do. And then we also, of course, as I said, answer questions about prospective projects. That's all I have. So this is my contact information, Jessica Bristow. My number is there. My email address, like all the other city email addresses, is my first and last name. And that's it.
Thank you, Jessica. Does anyone have any questions?
I did want to throw in that in addition to the historic preservation grants, we do have owner-occupied housing rehab program that provides grants. If you live in certain areas, which a lot of the historic districts and conservation districts are in, that provide a 50% grant. We can go up to $25,000 per rehab project. So information on our housing rehabilitation programs are on our website at icgov.org/housing rehab. So that's also another resource. So if you live in a historic district, our guidelines, and you're required by the historic preservation guidelines to have a certain material, that's covered under our program as well. We dedicate about $200,000 for that program every year. So that means you have access to $200,000 and then the $40,000 that we specifically designate as historic preservation funds.
Jessica, where can we get a list of the contractors, that list that you already have? Is that on the website or something you could email to me?
I can definitely email it to you. We tend not to just put it out there, partly because, you know, as I said, it's not a requirement, but also partly because the contractors on the list, you know, it's a limited list, they tend to get really busy. And we have for instance, we have a just contractor list. We have a window repair contractor list. We have a masonry, a list of masons. We have a list of roofers. So we have different lists depending on what they're going to do. But yeah, I can send you all of our lists as we have them. They change over time. You know, as we learn about new contractors, we want to add to that list as much as possible.
That would be great. I do have people from the public frequently call me looking for remodeler, roofing, windows, things like that. And so to be able to have that list also and be able to cross-reference it to our HBA members would be very helpful.
Sure.
And then if we do have members that I think should be on the list because I know that they work on historic homes, then I could put the two of you in contact with each other.
Yeah, that would be great.
Would it be possible to get a copy of the slides today?
I'm assuming so. That would probably be a question for Tracy.
Basically, anything we do is public, so yep, we can get that to you.
Would you send it to me, Tracy, and I'll include it in a weekly blast?
Sure.
And like I said, I'm recording today, so that'll go on our YouTube channel.
Sure.
And then we'll provide a link to it from today.
Might be too big to email, so we might have to come up with an alternative method.
We have Dropbox.
Great, we don't.
Okay. I'll send you a link to add it to.
Yeah.
Great,
We can find ways. Sometimes if we PDF, it's a lot easier to send to.
Yep,
Yes.
that'd be fine.
it is.
Thank you.
Anyone else? GT, I saw you unmute a few times. Did you have any questions? He's traveling today, and so I
Oh.
don't know how good of a connection he has. But otherwise, I'll stop the recording